My sister died suddenly at age 42, and everyone said it was a heart attack. The doctors confirmed it. The funeral was beautiful, and our family mourned together. But I knew the truth. They didn't. There was no heart attack. I had been poisoning her slowly for 6 months, and when she finally collapsed, I was the one who called the ambulance. For 40 years, I've carried this secret. And now it's time to confess what I did to my own sister. This confession reveals the darkest side of sibling rivalry and jealousy turned deadly. If you're ready to hear what really happened to my sister 40 years ago, subscribe to this channel right now. Hit the bell and never miss another haunting confession from the elderly who can no longer carry their secrets to the grave. Before we begin, drop your age in the comments below. I want to know how old you are when you first hear a truth this devastating. Now, let me tell you everything. My name is Margaret Sullivan, and I am 78 years old. For 40 years, I have lived with the knowledge that I murdered my sister, not in a moment of passion, not in self-defense, not accidentally. I killed her slowly, deliberately, over the course of 6 months, and I watched her die, knowing exactly what I had done. Her name was Catherine, and everyone loved her. That was the problem, really. Everyone had always loved Catherine more than they loved me. She was 2 years younger, but you would never know it from the way people treated us. She was the bright one, the pretty one, the one who could light up a room just by walking into it. I was the serious one, the plain one, the one people forgot was even there. Growing up in Boston in the 1960s, we were raised to be good Catholic girls, to be modest and humble and kind. Catherine embodied all of those virtues, effortlessly. I had to work at them, and even then, I never quite measured up. Our parents never said it explicitly, but I could see it in their eyes. Catherine was the daughter they had hoped for, and I was the one they got stuck with in addition. Catherine was homecoming queen in high school. I was in the chess club. Catherine had boys lining up to ask her to dances. I spent Saturday nights reading alone in my room. Catherine got a scholarship to study art at a prestigious university. I went to the local community college and became a bookkeeper. Even our career paths seemed to reflect our fundamental inequality. She created beauty. I counted numbers. But I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that sisters weren't supposed to compete, that love wasn't a limited resource, that there was room in the world for both of us to be happy. I almost believed it too. Almost. Then came David. I met him first. That's the part no one remembers, or perhaps they never knew. I met David Morrison at a library fundraiser in 1982. He was new to Boston, a lawyer who had just moved from Chicago for a position at a prestigious firm. We talked for 2 hours about books and music and philosophy. He asked for my number. We went on 3 dates, and for the first time in my life, I felt like someone saw me, really saw me, as more than just Catherine's less interesting older sister. I was planning to introduce him to my family at Sunday dinner. I was nervous but excited. I had bought a new dress. I had practiced what I would say. I imagined my parents' faces when they saw that someone had chosen me, that someone thought I was worth pursuing. But Catherine stopped by my apartment the night before that dinner. She needed to borrow something, a book, I think, or maybe a scarf. The excuse doesn't matter. What matters is that David was there. I introduced them casually, not thinking anything of it. Why would I? He was my boyfriend. Catherine had plenty of her own admirers. I saw it happen in real time. The way David's expression changed when he looked at her. The way his attention shifted completely, as if I had suddenly become invisible. The way Catherine smiled at him. That radiant smile that had been capturing hearts since she was 16. And the way she looked at him, with interest, with possibility, with that effortless charm that came as naturally to her as breathing. They talked. I stood there, watching my boyfriend and my sister discover each other, feeling like a ghost in my own apartment. When Catherine finally left, David was distracted for the rest of the evening. He cancelled our date for the next day. 3 days later, he called to tell me that he thought we should be friends instead of dating. He was very kind about it, very apologetic, but I knew before he said anything else. 6 weeks later, Catherine told the family she was dating someone new, a lawyer named David Morrison. Wonderful man, she said. So kind, so intelligent. She thought he might be the one. Our mother was thrilled. Our father approved. Everyone was happy for Catherine and her new relationship. No one asked me how I felt about it. No one seemed to remember that I had been dating David first. Or perhaps they remembered, but didn't think it mattered. After all, Catherine was the one David had chosen. Catherine was always the one everyone chose. They got engaged after 6 months. The wedding was planned for the following summer. Catherine asked me to be her maid of honor. She asked it so sweetly, so sincerely, genuinely believing that I would be happy for her, that I would want to stand beside her while she married the man who had been mine first, that I would celebrate her happiness, even as it was built on my heartbreak. I said yes, of course, because that's what good sisters do. That's what plain, forgettable Margaret was expected to do, smile and support and fade into the background while Catherine shined. But something had broken inside me. Something fundamental had cracked, and through that crack, dark thoughts began to seep in. Thoughts about fairness and justice, and the cosmic imbalance of a world where some people got everything while others got nothing. Thoughts about what it would be like if Catherine wasn't there, if for once in my life I could be the focus of attention, of love, of concern. At first, they were just thoughts. Ugly, shameful thoughts that I pushed away as soon as they appeared. But they kept coming back, stronger each time, and slowly, carefully, those thoughts began to transform into something else, into plans, into possibilities, into a terrible, unforgivable idea that I couldn't seem to shake. The wedding was scheduled for June 1985. In December 1984, I started researching poisons. I told myself I was just curious, that I wasn't actually going to do anything. I was a bookkeeper, methodical and detail-oriented. Research was just something I did. It didn't mean anything, but I was very thorough in my research. I learned about detection methods, about symptoms, about which substances left traces and which ones didn't. I learned about dosages and timing, and how to make death look natural. And I learned about antifreeze, specifically ethylene glycol, sweet-tasting, easily disguised in drinks or food, causing symptoms that could easily be mistaken for other illnesses. In small doses over time, it would cause kidney failure, heart problems, neurological damage. In the right dosage schedule, death would look like natural causes, like a tragic but explainable medical emergency. I bought my first bottle in January 1985. I told the clerk I needed it for my car. He didn't question it, didn't even seem to notice me. I was that forgettable. For 3 weeks, that bottle sat in my apartment, hidden in the back of my closet. I would look at it sometimes, would hold it in my hands and think about what it represented. The power to end someone's life. The power to make Catherine disappear. The way I had always felt like I was disappearing next to her. Catherine and I had coffee together every Monday, Wednesday and Friday morning. It was our tradition, started years ago when we both still lived at home. She would come to my apartment, I would make coffee, and we would talk about our weeks, our lives, our plans. Everyone thought it was sweet, how close we were. The two Sullivan sisters, so devoted to each other. On a Wednesday morning in late January, I added 1 teaspoon of antifreeze to Catherine's coffee. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost spilled it. My heart was pounding. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to stop, to pour the coffee down the sink, to confess what I had almost done, and beg for forgiveness. But I didn't. I gave Catherine that cup of coffee, watched her drink it while she talked about wedding dress fittings and honeymoon plans. She never noticed anything wrong. The antifreeze was masked by the sugar and cream she always added. She drank the entire cup, kissed my cheek goodbye, and left to meet David for lunch. That night, I threw up from stress and guilt. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what I had done, kept expecting the phone to ring with news that Catherine had collapsed, that she was in the hospital, that the doctors had found poison in her system. But nothing happened. Catherine was fine. 1 teaspoon wasn't enough to cause noticeable symptoms, just enough to begin the slow accumulation of toxins in her system. I told myself it was a one-time thing, a moment of madness that I wouldn't repeat. But when Wednesday came around again, when Catherine showed up at my door with her bright smile and her excitement about wedding invitations, I added another teaspoon to her coffee, and then another on Friday, and again the following Monday. It became a routine. Every time Catherine came over, I poisoned her, small amounts, carefully measured, not enough to cause immediate alarm, but enough to start causing damage. By March, Catherine was complaining about feeling tired all the time. By April, she was having stomach problems and headaches. The doctors ran tests, but couldn't find anything definitive. They suggested stress about the wedding, hormonal imbalances, maybe a mild virus that was taking a long time to clear. Catherine lost weight. Her skin took on a grayish tinge. She started missing work occasionally, something she had never done before. David was worried. Our parents were concerned. Everyone kept asking if she was eating enough, sleeping enough, taking care of herself. And I stood there, the concerned older sister, suggesting herbal teas and vitamins, offering to help with wedding planning to reduce her stress, being supportive and caring while I slowly killed her. In May, Catherine was hospitalized for the first time, severe abdominal pain and vomiting. They kept her for 3 days, ran more tests, and still found nothing conclusive. They mentioned the possibility of Crohn's disease or perhaps a severe ulcer. They gave her medication and sent her home to rest. I should have stopped then. I should have seen what I was doing to her, to our family, to everyone who loved her. But I was too far gone. The poison had become my secret power, my way of finally being in control, my revenge for a lifetime of being second best. And a terrible part of me was fascinated by how well it was working, how no one suspected, how easily I could destroy the golden sister who had everything I wanted. I increased the dosage. Instead of 1 teaspoon 3 times a week, I started adding 2. Catherine's condition deteriorated rapidly. She could barely get out of bed. The wedding, scheduled for late June, was postponed. David practically moved into her apartment to take care of her. Our mother was there constantly, and I visited every day, bringing soup and tea and sympathy. Each visit an opportunity to add more poison. The doctors were baffled. Catherine was dying, and they couldn't figure out why. They tested for cancer, for autoimmune disorders, for rare genetic conditions. They consulted specialists. They tried different treatments. Nothing worked because they were treating diseases she didn't have while missing the real cause. Her sister was murdering her. In early June, Catherine's kidneys began to fail. She was hospitalized again, this time in intensive care. The doctors told our family to prepare for the worst. They said her organs were shutting down, that her body was giving up for reasons they couldn't identify. Our mother collapsed in the waiting room. Our father aged 10 years overnight. David sat by Catherine's bedside, holding her hand, begging her to fight. And I sat in the hospital chapel, pretending to pray, knowing that I had caused all of this, knowing that I could end it by confessing, by telling the doctors what was really wrong so they could treat her properly. But I didn't. I stayed silent and let my sister die. On June 12, 1985, Catherine's heart stopped. The doctors tried to resuscitate her, but her body had taken too much damage. She was pronounced dead at 3:47 in the afternoon. The cause of death was listed as sudden cardiac arrest, secondary to acute kidney failure of unknown origin. She was 42 years old. I was the one who called our parents. I was the one who comforted David as he sobbed in the hospital corridor. I was the one who helped plan the funeral, who chose the flowers, who wrote the obituary. Everyone praised me for being so strong, so supportive, such a good sister, even in the midst of my own grief. And at the funeral, I stood at the casket, looked at Catherine's peaceful dead face, and felt absolutely nothing. No grief, no remorse, no satisfaction, just emptiness. The woman who had overshadowed me my entire life was gone, and I had won. But the victory felt hollow, meaningless, wrong, in ways I couldn't articulate. David left Boston 3 months after the funeral. He said he couldn't bear to be in the city, where he and Catherine had been so happy. He never came back. I never saw him again. And I went back to my life. Back to my job, my routine, my existence as forgettable Margaret Sullivan. Except now, I was also Catherine's grieving sister, the woman who had lost her closest family member. People were kind to me in a way they never had been before. They asked how I was doing. They included me in their prayers. For the first time in my life, I was the center of attention and concern. But it was all based on a lie so enormous, so unforgivable, that it colored everything that came after. I had murdered my sister out of jealousy and spite, and no amount of false sympathy could change that truth. For 40 years I have lived with what I did, and for 40 years I have wondered, was it worth it? Did killing Catherine give me the life I wanted? Did her absence make me more visible, more valued, more loved? The answer, I now know, is no. Because you can't build happiness on murder. You can't find peace when your sister's ghost haunts every moment of your existence. And you can't escape the truth, no matter how deeply you bury it. Catherine has been dead for 40 years. And for 40 years I have been dying too, slowly poisoned by guilt instead of antifreeze, withering under the weight of what I did. Now finally, it's time to confess. Not for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. Not for redemption. There is none for someone like me. But for truth. Because Catherine deserves to have someone acknowledge how she really died. And I deserve to finally stop pretending I'm anything other than what I am. A murderer who got away with it for 40 years. The first year after Catherine's death was the strangest of my life. I had expected to feel relief. Perhaps even satisfaction. I had eliminated the source of my lifelong resentment, removed the obstacle to my own recognition and value. But instead of liberation, I felt nothing. Just a vast, empty numbness that settled over me like a fog. Our mother never recovered. She aged rapidly in the months following the funeral, her grief transforming her from a vibrant woman in her 60s into a frail, broken shell. She would sit in Catherine's old room for hours, holding her daughter's things, weeping quietly. She died 2 years later, and everyone said it was a broken heart. They were right, but they didn't know that I was the one who had broken it. Our father became distant and cold. He threw himself into his work at the manufacturing plant, where he had been a supervisor for 30 years. He stopped coming to family gatherings, stopped calling me on Sundays, stopped engaging with life in any meaningful way. He died 5 years after Catherine, alone in his house, having essentially given up on living after losing his favorite daughter. I attended both funerals. I cried at both services, and both times I thought I killed them too. Not directly, not with poison, but just as surely as if I had. Catherine's death had destroyed our parents, and I was responsible for all of it. David never married. I learned this years later, through mutual acquaintances. He had loved Catherine so completely that her death left him unable to open his heart to anyone else. He lived alone in Chicago, worked long hours, and died of a heart attack at 61. Alone in his office on a Friday evening, found by the cleaning crew on Monday morning. Another life destroyed by Catherine's death. Another death I had caused, even if indirectly. But life, as it tends to do, moved on. The world didn't stop because Catherine Sullivan had died. People mourned, then gradually stopped mourning. They remembered her fondly, but they moved forward with their own lives, and so did I, in a fashion. I continued my work as a bookkeeper, maintained my small apartment, went through the motions of ordinary existence. Except nothing was ordinary anymore. Every interaction was filtered through the lens of my secret. Every conversation felt like a performance. Every moment of normalcy was undercut by the knowledge that I was a murderer pretending to be a normal person. I started having nightmares about 3 months after Catherine's death. In them, she would appear healthy and vibrant, smiling at me the way she used to. But then her skin would turn grey, her eyes would become hollow, and she would look at me with an expression of betrayed understanding. She never spoke in these dreams, but she didn't need to. Her presence was accusation enough. I would wake up in cold sweats, my heart racing, convinced that someone knew, that the doctors had run one more test, found traces of ethylene glycol, launched an investigation, that the police were on their way to arrest me, that justice was finally catching up. But the phone never rang with those calls. No one ever suspected. Catherine's death remained a medical mystery, a tragedy of unknown causes, a life cut short by cruel fate rather than crueler sister. The bottle of antifreeze remained hidden in my closet for 2 years. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, but I also couldn't stand to look at it. It represented everything I had done, all the darkness I was capable of, the line I had crossed that could never be uncrossed. Finally, in 1987, I poured it down a storm drain late one night, disposing of the physical evidence, while the psychological evidence continued to consume me from the inside. I tried to date after Catherine died. Well-meaning friends set me up with men they thought would be suitable for a quiet, bookish woman approaching middle age. I went through the motions: dinners, movies, awkward conversations, but I couldn't let anyone get close. How could I? Intimacy requires honesty, and I was living the biggest lie imaginable. Every potential relationship died before it began, killed by the secret I couldn't share. I never married, never had children, never built the life I thought I wanted. The life I thought Catherine had been preventing me from having. because the truth I learned too late was that Catherine hadn't been holding me back. I had been holding myself back, using her as an excuse for my own inadequacies, blaming her for my failures instead of taking responsibility for my own life. And by the time I realized this, I had already killed her for something that was never really her fault. The guilt grew worse over time, not better. I had expected it to fade, to become manageable, to transform into something I could live with. But it did the opposite. It metastasized, spreading through every aspect of my existence, until there was no part of my life untouched by what I had done. I started going to church regularly, something I hadn't done since childhood. I would sit in the back pew during Mass, listening to sermons about forgiveness and redemption, wondering if there was any possibility of either for someone like me. The priest would talk about God's infinite mercy, about how no sin was too great to be forgiven. But I knew he was wrong. Some sins are too monstrous for forgiveness. Some actions put you beyond redemption. I considered going to confession many times. The Catholic Church promises absolution for confessed sins, a clean slate, a chance to be forgiven by God even if you can't forgive yourself. But every time I approached the confessional booth, I would freeze. Because confessing to a priest meant admitting the truth out loud. And once I did that, I wouldn't be able to take it back. And what would the priest do with such a confession? Was he bound by confidentiality for a murder? Would he tell the police? Should he? I never found out. I never had the courage to confess to anyone, religious or otherwise. So the guilt continued to grow, feeding on my silence, becoming more unbearable with each passing year. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into my job with an intensity that surprised my employers. I worked late hours, took on extra projects, volunteered for the most tedious and difficult assignments. Numbers were safe, predictable, honest in a way I could never be. In spreadsheets and ledgers there were right answers and wrong answers, clear rules and consequences. Unlike life, unlike morality, unlike the gray area where I had justified murder, I became known as the dependable one, the woman who never complained and never said no. People relied on me, trusted me with their financial records, their sensitive information, their private business dealings. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was trusted implicitly, while hiding the biggest betrayal of trust imaginable. I moved through my 40s and 50s like a ghost, present but not really alive. I had acquaintances but no real friends. Friendship requires vulnerability, and I couldn't afford to be vulnerable. I had routines but no joy. I existed but didn't live. Catherine had been dead for decades, but in many ways, I had died too. I had killed myself, along with her, just more slowly. On what would have been Catherine's 60th birthday, I visited her grave. I had been there countless times over the years, maintaining the headstone, leaving flowers, playing the role of the devoted sister. But this time was different. This time I sat by her grave and tried to have a conversation with her, tried to explain why I had done it, tried to make sense of the senseless. I talked about our childhood, about the constant comparisons, about how it felt to always be in her shadow. I talked about David, about the heartbreak of watching him choose her over me. I talked about the jealousy that had consumed me, the rage that had built up over decades, the moment when that rage had transformed into something actionable and deadly. And I apologized. Not because I thought she could hear me, not because I believed in ghosts or an afterlife where the dead judge the living, but because I needed to say it out loud, needed to acknowledge what I had done to her, needed to speak the truth, even if only to a headstone in an empty cemetery. The words felt empty, insufficient, ridiculous even. How do you apologize for murder? What words could possibly be adequate? Sorry I poisoned you over 6 months and watched you die in agony. Sorry I robbed you of decades of life, of a marriage, of children, of all the experiences you'll never have. Sorry I destroyed our parents with grief and sent David into a lifetime of loneliness. There are no words for that kind of sorry. There's only the hollow echo of them falling into the void of what can never be undone. I started writing about it when I was 65. Not a confession exactly, more of an attempt to understand what I had done and why. I filled notebooks with analysis of my psychology, my motivations, my justifications. I tried to trace the path from normal sibling rivalry to premeditated murder, to find the moment when I crossed from envious sister to killer. But the writing brought no clarity, no understanding, no peace. Because the truth was simple and terrible. I had killed Catherine because I was jealous, because I was resentful, because I couldn't stand that she had what I wanted. All the psychological analysis in the world couldn't make that into something more complex or more forgivable. It was just the petty, ugly truth of a woman who chose murder over personal growth. I burned those notebooks eventually, threw them into my fireplace one winter evening, and watched them turn to ash. The destruction of evidence, the erasure of truth, the continued cover-up of what I had done. Even in my attempts at honesty, I chose concealment. My retirement came when I was 67. The accounting firm I had worked for gave me a gold watch and a small party. People made speeches about my dedication and reliability. They gave me cards expressing their appreciation for my years of service, and I stood there, accepting their praise while thinking, if you knew what I really am, you would recoil in horror. Retirement was supposed to be a relief, a time to rest and enjoy life, but it was torture. Without work to distract me, I was left alone with my thoughts, my guilt, my memories. The days stretched endlessly. I would wake up with nothing to do but think about Catherine, about what I had done to her, about the 40 years I had lived that she hadn't. I started visiting her grave more frequently, weekly, then daily. I would sit there for hours, talking to her, apologizing to her, asking her questions I knew she couldn't answer. The cemetery staff began to recognize me. The old woman who spent entire afternoons at her sister's grave. They probably thought it was sweet, evidence of devoted sisterly love. They had no idea they were witnessing the slow breakdown of a murderer's sanity. On what would have been Catherine's 75th birthday, I made a decision. I couldn't live like this anymore. The guilt was consuming me, eating away at whatever was left of my sanity and soul. I had 3 choices: continue as I had been, slowly going mad with guilt, end my own life, and take the secret to whatever comes after death, or confess and face the consequences. Suicide was tempting. It would end the suffering, the constant weight of guilt, the endless replay of what I had done, but it also felt like the coward's way out. One final act of selfishness from a woman whose life had been defined by selfish choices. Catherine hadn't gotten to choose when her life ended. Why should I? Continuing as I had been wasn't really an option either. I was 78 years old, and every day felt like a century. I couldn't endure another year of this, let alone however many years I might have left. The guilt would kill me eventually, if not physically, then mentally. I was already having trouble distinguishing dreams from reality. memory from imagination. That left confession, the option I had been avoiding for 40 years, the step I had been too cowardly to take. But what would confession accomplish at this point? Catherine was long dead. Our parents were dead. David was dead. Most of the people who had known and loved Catherine were gone. The statute of limitations hadn't expired. There is no statute of limitations on murder, but prosecution seemed unlikely for a crime 40 years old, with no physical evidence, and a defendant who might not live long enough to stand trial. So what was the point? If not justice, if not punishment, if not some kind of cosmic balancing of scales, then why confess at all? The answer came to me slowly, over weeks of agonized deliberation. Truth, not truth for some noble purpose, not truth to clear my conscience or earn forgiveness, but truth because lies had poisoned everything in my life, just as surely as I had poisoned Catherine. Truth because 40 years of deception had turned me into a hollow shell of a person. Truth because Catherine deserved to have someone acknowledge how she really died, even if that acknowledgement came far too late to matter. But there was one complication I hadn't fully considered, one question that paralyzed me every time I came close to confessing. What if no one believed me? I was 78 years old. I had no physical evidence. The crime had occurred 40 years ago. Medical records from 1985 were likely destroyed or lost. The doctors who had treated Catherine were probably retired or dead. The hospital where she died might not even exist anymore. And most importantly, I had no credible motive that anyone could understand. How do you explain to police, to prosecutors, to anyone, that you killed your sister because she was prettier than you, that you murdered her because a man chose her over you, that you poisoned her over 6 months because you were jealous of her happiness? It sounded absurd even to me, and I was the one who had done it. They might think I was delusional, suffering from dementia, confessing to a crime I had only imagined committing. They might humor me, take a report, and then file it away as the ravings of an old woman whose mind was going. And then I would have confessed for nothing, would have opened this wound without any acknowledgement of the truth, without any real consequences, or worse, they might believe me. They might arrest me, charge me with murder, put me on trial, and then what? Prison for whatever few years I had left, public exposure as a monster, the destruction of whatever small legacy I might have, my name forever associated with this terrible crime, this unforgivable betrayal. Both possibilities terrified me equally. Being ignored and being believed both seemed like unbearable outcomes. And so I remained frozen, unable to move forward with confession or back into comfortable denial, trapped in a liminal space between truth and lies. But I knew I was running out of time to decide. I was old, and getting older every day. My health was declining slowly but steadily. Eventually the decision would be made for me by death, and the truth would die with me. Catherine would remain officially a victim of mysterious natural causes, and I would escape justice one final time, simply by outliving the possibility of punishment. The question was, could I live with that? Could I die with that? Could I face whatever comes after death, if anything comes after, carrying this secret still? I didn't know. Even now, even having reached the point where I'm recording this confession, I still don't know if I'm doing the right thing. All I know is that 40 years of silence hasn't brought peace, hasn't eased the guilt, hasn't made anything better. Maybe truth won't either. But at least it will be honest. At least Catherine's death will be acknowledged for what it was. Murder, not medical mystery. At least someone, somewhere will know that she didn't die of natural causes, that her life was stolen from her by someone she trusted and loved. That's something. It's not enough, will never be enough, but it's something. The decision came to me on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was 78 years old, sitting in my small apartment, drinking coffee, the same beverage I had used to poison my sister 40 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. Every cup of coffee I had consumed since Catherine's death had been a reminder, a small daily penance for what I had done. I realized that morning that I had been dead for 40 years, just like Catherine. I had been walking and talking and going through the motions, but I hadn't really been alive. The murder hadn't just killed her, it had killed me too. The difference was that her death was final and merciful, while mine had been prolonged and agonizing, stretched out over decades of guilt and self-loathing. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't carry this weight for another day, another hour, another minute. The secret had grown too heavy, too consuming, too destructive. It was time to tell the truth. Whatever the consequences, I started by writing everything down, every detail, every moment, every decision that had led me from envious sister to murderer. I wrote about the jealousy, the resentment, the research into poisons, the methodical execution of my plan, the 6 months of slowly killing Catherine while pretending to be her loving sister. I wrote about watching her die, about attending her funeral, about the 40 years of living with what I had done. The document was 23 pages long when I finished. It took me 3 days to write, 3 days of reliving every terrible moment, of forcing myself to confront the full horror of what I had done, without the softening filter of time or rationalization. Reading it back, I was struck by how cold and calculating I had been. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of madness. It was premeditated murder, carried out with patience and precision over months. I made copies of the confession, one for the police, one for what remained of my family, a few distant cousins who barely remembered Catherine, one for Catherine's grave, to be placed there after everything else was done, and one that I kept for myself, a record of the truth that I had hidden for so long. Then I called a lawyer, not to defend myself. I had no intention of fighting whatever charges might come, but to help me navigate the process of confessing to a 40-year-old murder. The lawyer was young, probably in her early 30s, with kind eyes and a professional demeanor that faltered only slightly when I explained why I needed her services. She asked if I was sure I wanted to do this, explained that given my age and the time that had passed, I might face significant legal consequences, reminded me that I could simply let the secret die with me, that no one would ever know, that justice delayed this long might not be justice at all. But I was certain, more certain than I had been about anything in 40 years. I needed to confess, needed to face consequences, needed to finally stop lying about who and what I was. The lawyer agreed to help me, though I could see the doubt in her eyes. She probably thought I was senile, delusional, confessing to something I had imagined or dreamed. We went to the police station together on a Thursday afternoon. I wore my best dress, the dark blue one I saved for important occasions. I wanted to look dignified, coherent, like someone whose confession should be taken seriously. The lawyer had called ahead, so they were expecting us. We were shown to an interview room, sterile and cold, with a camera recording everything. The detective was middle-aged, tired-looking, skeptical. He introduced himself and explained the process. Then he asked me to tell him why I was there. I handed him the written confession and then told the story again, out loud, from beginning to end. The jealousy, the poison, the systematic murder of my sister, the 40 years of silence. He listened without interrupting, his expression cycling through disbelief, shock, and grim professional focus. When I finished, he asked questions. Could I provide evidence? Did anyone else know? Why was I confessing now? I answered everything honestly. No physical evidence remained. No one else knew. I was confessing because I couldn't live with the lie anymore, because Catherine deserved to have the truth known, because I needed to face consequences for what I had done. The detective explained that investigating a 40-year-old case would be difficult. Medical records might not exist. The hospital where Catherine died had been torn down and rebuilt. Most of the doctors who treated her were likely retired or deceased. Without physical evidence or witnesses, prosecution might be impossible, even with a confession. But he also said they would investigate. They would pull what records still existed, interview anyone who might remember the case, consult with prosecutors about whether charges could be brought. The process might take weeks or months. In the meantime, given my age and the fact that I had voluntarily come forward, I would not be arrested immediately. I was told not to leave the city and to remain available for further questioning. I went home that day, feeling lighter than I had in 40 years. The truth was out. The secret was told. Whatever happened next, at least I was no longer lying. At least Catherine's death would be investigated as what it was: murder. The investigation took 3 months. Detectives interviewed me multiple times, pressing for details, looking for inconsistencies in my story. They found Catherine's medical records in an old archive, reviewed the autopsy report, consulted with toxicology experts about whether antifreeze poisoning could have been missed in 1985. They tracked down one of the doctors who had treated Catherine, now in his 70s and retired. He remembered the case vaguely, remembered the mystery of her death, the frustration of not being able to save her. The toxicology experts confirmed what I had told them. Ethylene glycol poisoning in the 1980s often went undetected, especially when administered in small doses over time. The symptoms mimicked other conditions. The tests that would have identified it weren't routinely run unless specifically suspected. Catherine's death could very well have been caused by poison, and the medical establishment of the time would have missed it completely. The prosecutor's office reviewed everything and made their decision. They would charge me with first-degree murder. Despite the passage of time, despite my age, despite the difficulty of proving a 40-year-old case, they felt the evidence, primarily my detailed confession, was sufficient to proceed. The statute of limitations didn't apply to murder. Justice, they said, had no expiration date. I was arrested formally, fingerprinted, photographed, processed through the system like any other criminal. The booking officer was gentle with me, perhaps out of pity for my age, perhaps out of discomfort at having to arrest a 78-year-old woman. But I was grateful for the handcuffs, for the official acknowledgement of my crime, for the beginning of consequences I had escaped for 40 years. The lawyer, she had stayed with me through all of this, advised me to plead guilty. There was no point in a trial, she said. I had confessed, provided details only the killer would know, shown no signs of dementia or mental incapacity. A guilty plea would be faster, cleaner, less traumatic for everyone involved. I agreed immediately. The last thing I wanted was a trial, with testimony and evidence, and the whole story paraded in front of the public. I wanted to accept responsibility and face punishment. That was the entire point of confessing in the first place. The guilty plea hearing was brief. The judge asked if I understood the charges against me. I confirmed that I did. She asked if anyone had coerced or pressured me into confessing. I assured her that no one had, that this was entirely my decision. She asked if I was pleading guilty, because I was in fact guilty. I looked her directly in the eyes and said yes, I murdered my sister Catherine Sullivan in 1985 by poisoning her with antifreeze over a period of 6 months. The courtroom was mostly empty. A few reporters, some court staff, my lawyer, no family members. I had none left. No one to speak on my behalf or against me. Just an old woman accepting responsibility for a crime 4 decades past. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the interim, I was released on my own recognizance, deemed not a flight risk given my age and physical condition. I went home to my apartment and waited for judgment. I spent those 2 weeks putting my affairs in order. I wrote letters to the few people who had been kind to me over the years, explaining what I had done and apologizing for the deception. I donated most of my possessions to charity. I visited Catherine's grave one final time, placed a copy of my confession there, and apologized again for what I had taken from her. The sentencing hearing brought closure I hadn't expected. The judge had reviewed everything: my confession, the investigation, the medical evidence, statements from the prosecutor, and my lawyer. She spoke for several minutes about the severity of my crime, about the premeditated nature of the murder, about the 40 years during which I had escaped justice. Then she addressed me directly. She acknowledged my voluntary confession, my cooperation with the investigation, my evident remorse. She noted my age and health, the fact that I posed no danger to society, the unique circumstances of a defendant confessing to a decades-old crime with no external pressure to do so. The sentence was 10 years, suspended due to my age and health. I would serve no prison time, but would be placed under house arrest for the remainder of my life, required to wear an ankle monitor, and remain within my residence except for medical appointments. It was, the judge said, a balance between justice and mercy, between accountability and practicality. Some might say, I got away with it. That house arrest for a 78-year-old was barely punishment at all. That I should have gone to prison, should have died behind bars like I deserved. And they wouldn't be wrong. The punishment was lenient, far less than I deserved for taking Catherine's life. But the real punishment wasn't the ankle monitor or the confinement. It was the public acknowledgement of what I had done. The news articles that ran about the case. The people who had known me learning the truth about who I really was. The destruction of any positive legacy I might have had. My name forever associated with jealousy, murder, betrayal. That was the punishment I had really been seeking. Truth. Not imprisonment, not physical suffering, but the end of the lie. The confession itself was the punishment, and everything that followed was just paperwork. Catherine's death certificate was amended. The cause of death changed from natural causes to homicide. A small change in official records, but it mattered. It meant that somewhere in some archive, the truth about her death existed. She hadn't died of mysterious natural causes. She had been murdered, and her killer had been identified, charged, convicted. I think about Catherine every day now, just as I did before confessing. But the thoughts are different. Before, they were consumed by guilt and fear, and the constant anxiety of keeping a secret. Now they're simpler. Sadness for what I took from her, regret for choices that can never be undone, and a strange kind of peace in finally being honest about what happened. I don't expect forgiveness, Not from Catherine, not from God if there is one, not from anyone. What I did is unforgivable. I took a life out of petty jealousy and spite. I robbed someone of decades they should have lived, experiences they should have had, joys they should have known. No amount of confession or punishment can undo that, but I can tell the truth. I can acknowledge what I did, accept responsibility, face consequences. I can make sure that Catherine's death is remembered accurately, that she isn't forgotten, that her murder isn't swept away into the comfortable fiction of natural causes. I'm 78 years old. I probably don't have many years left. The ankle monitor feels like a shackle, but it's also a reminder I am a murderer, and this is what murderers deserve. The confinement to my apartment feels like a prison, but it's nothing compared to the prison of guilt I lived in for 40 years. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I hadn't killed Catherine. Would I have found happiness eventually? Would I have stopped comparing myself to her, stopped letting jealousy poison everything? Would I have built a meaningful life instead of wasting 40 years drowning in guilt? I'll never know. Those possibilities died in 1985, killed by the same antifreeze that killed my sister. The moment I made the decision to poison her, I killed not just Catherine but also any chance I had at a decent life. Murder doesn't just destroy the victim, it destroys the killer too, even if that destruction takes decades to fully manifest. If there's any lesson in my story, any message worth extracting from this sordid confession, it's this: jealousy is a poison more deadly than any chemical. I drank it every day for years, let it corrode my soul, let it transform me from a flawed but ordinary person into a killer. The jealousy killed me long before I used it to kill Catherine. I just didn't realize it at the time. And secrets are their own form of poison. For 40 years I thought I was protecting myself by keeping the truth hidden. But all I was doing was slowly poisoning my own life, making it impossible to connect with others, to find peace, to be anything other than a hollow shell pretending at humanity. The confession didn't make things better, exactly, but it made them honest. And honest suffering is easier to bear than suffering based on lies. My name is Margaret Sullivan. I am 78 years old. I murdered my sister Catherine by poisoning her with antifreeze over 6 months in 1985. I confessed 40 years later, not because I wanted forgiveness or redemption, but because the truth mattered more than my comfort. Catherine would have been 82 years old now. She might have had grandchildren, a career she loved, a life full of meaning and joy. Instead, she's been dead for 40 years, buried in a cemetery I visit weekly, wearing an ankle monitor that reminds me every day that I'm the one who put her there. This is my confession. This is my truth. And now that it's told, I can finally face whatever time I have left with honesty, if not with peace. I robbed Catherine of her future. I destroyed our parents with grief. I wasted my own life on guilt and secrets. But I can't rob the world of the truth, that at least I can give freely, even if it comes 40 years too late. Catherine died on June 12, 1985. But the truth about her death survived, and that truth, painful and terrible as it is, matters, because people deserve to know how they died. Because murder shouldn't be disguised as natural causes. Because accountability, even delayed by decades, is better than eternal lies. I killed my sister. I confessed. I faced consequences. The story ends here, with an old woman in an apartment confined and condemned, finally honest after 40 years of deception. It's not redemption. It's not forgiveness. It's not peace. But it's truth. And after 40 years of lies, that's something. If this confession impacted you, please subscribe to this channel for more stories from the elderly who can no longer bear their secrets alone. Every week, I share real confessions about guilt, betrayal, and the terrible prices we pay for our choices. Hit that bell icon so you never miss a story. These confessions remind us that the truth, no matter how painful or how late it comes, is always worth speaking. One final question: was Margaret right to confess after 40 years, or should she have taken the secret to her grave? Share your honest thoughts in the comments.